Welcome to the debate. We're here today to examine some pretty substantive disagreements that emerge directly from the source material. And this material, it details a period of really profound technological compromise, systemic vulnerability across corporations, across government, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, the crisis that's laid out is undeniable. It's a huge cyber catastrophe. But today we want to focus specifically on the figures who are often linked to, well, both sides of the coin, right? The problems and sometimes the solutions, the hackers.
Right. So our central question today, it's really about intent versus outcome. Does the hacker community ultimately act as this sort of necessary, maybe rogue, but necessary defense force? Do they ensure system integrity, electronic freedom by forcing things out in the open? Or are they fundamentally just a criminal element, one whose sort of chaotic actions actually make things worse, exacerbating technological fragility and creating these huge national security threats? I'm going to argue that, hackers are essential catalysts. They force needed security improvements, and they act as guardians, really, of digital freedom, upholding the value of challenge.
And I'll be maintaining that their actions are fundamentally destabilizing, fundamentally criminal. Regardless of any internal philosophy they might claim, their methods, well, they create the perfect cover, the perfect opportunity for truly catastrophic state-level attacks against the nation's critical infrastructure. And that makes them, at the end of the day, a net liability.
Okay, so the premise of the hacker as, let's say, a constructive force, it really starts with their philosophical stance. It's often described as the code of ethics. And look, this isn't just, youthful rebellion we're talking about. It's often a commitment driven by the thrill of intellectual exploration. And a sincere belief, a guiding belief, really, that information access ought to be a fundamental right. It's that mentality you see captured in phrases like, "Long live the revolution." So their interventions, they're not just random malice. They're often framed as a direct response to institutional complacency, to systems being left wide open. And the source material, it kind of validates this perspective, right? It notes that hackers could truthfully assert that, quote, "every computer system in the country has been entered by hackers." Now, that wasn't just a boast about destruction. It was a really devastating indictment of the frankly dismal, neglected state of security across government and corporate networks. It absolutely required public exposure. And what's more, the community wasn't just, breaking things. It was reactive. When the really serious threats emerged, the material shows key individuals, decentralized groups, people like Kirk and Rambo, actively working to mitigate the damage. They quickly communicated crucial information about the spread of these new chaos viruses. They collaboratively helped locate and eradicate infected programs. They were even providing vital leads, not just to the press, mind you, but to official bodies like the FBI. So in a way, they functioned like a digital immune system, responding to infections that the established institutional security completely failed to prevent in the first place.
I guess I come at this from a rather different angle, shifting the focus entirely from maybe idealistic intent to, well, the concrete outcome. We really can't afford, I think, to romanticize behavior that leads to such massive, undeniable damage and expense. The material confirms that the consequences of this, let's call it exploration, are universally damaging. I mean, just take the incident with Chase's worm, released into internet. It single-handedly caused an estimated, $100 million in damage, just crippling thousands of networked computers. Now, that's not benign exploration. That is effectively economic warfare, whether it was intended that way or not. And that boast you hear, commonly in the community, once you let one of us inside your computer, it's all over, it confirms that they view themselves, correctly, I think, as fundamentally destabilizing forces. But what truly worries me is that the very skills, the very attitudes that are sometimes celebrated by this community, the thrill of the challenge, the bypassing of authority, the exploitation of flaws, these are directly convertible into weapons of, national strategic threat. The material's main antagonist, the architect of the most catastrophic economic and viral attacks. Miles Foster, also known as Spook, he himself was a highly skilled senior NSA analyst. He used core hacker methodologies, creating sophisticated, targeted hardware viruses, purely for the challenge and the resulting chaos. This fusion, it just demonstrates that the hacker mindset is a pipeline for creating national-level threats. And beyond that, their methods are just inherently criminal and invasive. Things like scanning phone lines, phreaking, or accessing massive databases like the IRS backplane, where one hacker, Waldo, discovered the frankly deeply disturbing truth that, quote, no one is in control over there. This widespread criminal activity, it generates the very systemic distrust, the panic that the larger conspirators like Foster sought to create. So I see why you emphasize the maybe philosophical purity of the code, but I worry that this focus on individual intention is precisely the distraction we need to avoid, because the real-world outcome is chaos. Chaos that's easily exploited by truly malicious actors. Let's just look at the Freedom League, which, you might cite as an example of free information sharing. Scott Mason uncovered that this league, which on the surface gives away software for the greater good, was actually serving as a franchise service. And it was used, unknowingly perhaps, to distribute over 1.3 million infected programs, the core of the Foster viruses. These things were designed to detonate over a period of years, causing prolonged systemic damage. So the desire for open, unrestricted sharing, which is, a cornerstone of the hacker ethos, it was completely subverted by the chaotic, wide-open environment that the hacker community itself promotes. Their philosophical environment, I'd argue, is a massive security liability, not a systemic asset.
Okay. That is a compelling point, and the scale of the Foster viruses is certainly chilling. However, I would frame the context of that liability quite differently. The source material seems very clear on this. The most significant damage detailed, the truly staggering $50 billion economic hit to the U.S. economy from the stock exchange closure. That wasn't caused by, the accidental subversion of the Freedom League by some random hackers. It was caused by a highly coordinated, almost state-level scheme using advanced military hardware, specifically EMP T-bombs, and these complex hardware viruses designed by Miles Foster, who, let's remember, was a former high-level government professional. So while the hacker community is, unquestionably messy, and individuals like Chase definitely cause real problems, you also see this internal debate. You see ethicists like Solon promoting the hacker ethic, showing an active effort towards some kind of self-governance. The true vulnerability, I'd argue, isn't when some college student finds a weak password like secret. It's when established high-level technical expertise, rooted in the secrecy of the NSA itself, is turned outward with malicious, strategic intent.
But surely you see that Foster needed the preconditioned. He didn't just operate in a vacuum. He leveraged the environment of, fragility that the hacking community had already created. The very fact that the Freedom League could distribute 1.3 million infected programs, it proves that the infrastructure, the cultural trust in open systems, the deliberate breakdown of traditional security protocols, that was already established by the quote-unquote good guys, right? Foster simply weaponized the culture of free information and the systemic distrust that your community insists on cultivating. You can point to Solon and ethical debates all you want, but the results, the outcome, points to systemic failure, which is precisely why Foster's psychological warfare was so effective.
I have to reiterate, though, that the most successful malicious actor here, Foster, he represented a failure of internal government controls, not primarily a failure of the decentralized community. In fact, many members of that very community, people like Kirk and Rambo again, were actively counteracting the chaos viruses. They were using their speed, their knowledge of the networks, essentially cleaning up the mess. They provided that essential service of exposing the truth that governmental security often wasn't a real technological priority. It was, as the material puts it, merely a political compromise and not a fiscal or technical reality. The public would likely never have grasped the extent of these deep flaws otherwise. And this is where the essential service, I think, of the hacker community really comes into focus. Transparency. Scott Mason's readership, right? Thanks to sources connected to this technical undercurrent, they knew about monumental governmental failures, things like the defective Hubble telescope mirrors, the gene tech spore cover-up months before the government or the GSA officially admitted fault. These were serious, politically embarrassing truths that the official bodies clearly intended to delay or even bury. Hackers, in this sense, force governmental transparency. They compel action that political bodies would often prefer to avoid. And it seems invaluable, doesn't it? Especially in a democracy where complex technology is increasingly hidden behind layers and layers of bureaucracy.
I'm still not convinced that the value of that exposure outweighs the catastrophic cost of essentially facilitating the enemy. The service, as you call it, of exposing every single flaw is precisely what Miles Foster's Homo Soto operation required to achieve its strategic objectives. Foster's plan, it explicitly relied on turning these blackmailed secrets and the resulting computer havoc, including, yes, the expose of the $3 billion embezzlement revealed by Mason, into, quote, pure psychological warfare. The strategic objective was terrifyingly simple, making people distrust their computers, distrust one another. That was the goal. So when hackers celebrate that technology is in the hands of the people, they are simultaneously demonstrating and advertising the exact vulnerabilities that hostile foreign powers or corporate entities can exploit to inflict national strategic damage.
By bringing everything into the open, they kind of eliminate the element of surprise, don't they? They hand sophisticated adversaries the blueprint for destruction.
I see the risk, but I'd argue that suppressing the truth about, say, a $3 billion embezzlement or a defective Hubble mirror is actually far more dangerous in the long run than managing the fallout of its exposure. The hacker community, by bringing these flaws to light, is forcing society, forcing institutions to confront the reality that their infrastructure is weak. If the systems were truly robust, truly well managed, Foster's psychological warfare probably wouldn't have worked nearly as well. The crisis, I think, was fundamentally rooted in corruption and negligence, not simply in the act of exposure. The hacker is more like the messenger, maybe an unwelcome one, but not the primary cause of the disease itself.
But the messenger is directly enabling the destruction. The strategic goal was to collapse confidence, remember. And the widespread security failures combines with the ability of this community to invade the privacy of American citizens. By compiling information across incredibly sensitive national databases like the IRS, the Census Bureau, the FBI, that directly enabled government overreach. Marvin Jacobs, the director of the NSA at the time, he explicitly noted, didn't he, that citing national security is a great antidote to political inconvenience. He used the crisis, the chaos the hackers helped create, to aggressively launch sweeping surveillance programs, specifically CMR, which involves eavesdropping on computer emanations, essentially monitoring digital leakage from screens and processors. And he also justified mass surveillance of digital communication by asserting, well, phone tapping cellular calls was already legal anyway. The point is, the chaos created by the hacker community provided the necessary political cover, the legal expediency for the NSA to violate privacy on a massive systemic scale.
Right, and that line from Tyrone Duncan, the one about a handful of paranoid, unelected, unbudgeted, non-accountable mid-level bureaucrats deciding the future of privacy and freedom, that captures the genuinely terrifying governmental reality that I believe the hacker community actively combats. And this is precisely why that community, specifically organizations advocating for electronic free speech like FYI, free flow of your information, why they are so essential. They act as perhaps the only effective public check against this kind of unchecked governmental power. I mean, had the NSA been left to operate in total silent secrecy, the public might never have known the true extent of programs like CMR. Instead, the hackers' activities, they forced intense media scrutiny. They prompted proposed legislation, like the computer license law. They injected public debate into areas that intelligence agencies desperately wanted to keep hidden. Their action is a necessary form of digital civil disobedience, albeit, yes, an abrasive one.
Digital civil disobedience that, again, facilitates the most damaging attack in modern history. The cost is just too high. The very existence of this pervasive hacker community gives agencies like the NSA all the justification they feel they need to rationalize massive systematic invasions of privacy,
You can't, it seems to me, simultaneously advocate for digital freedom while providing the enemy, both foreign and domestic, with the blueprints and the crisis required to justify totalitarian government responses. It's a contradiction.
Well, we've certainly established that this world of information technology, it's far from black and white, isn't it? The definitions of defense and crime get incredibly blurred, especially when the institutions designed to protect us are themselves shown to be corrupt or incompetent. So, while yes, the actions of some individuals within the hacker community are undeniably criminal, even destructive, I still maintain their collective, maybe philosophical effect is ultimately to prevent a slide into technological totalitarianism. They expose truths that powerful entities were consistently hiding. They uphold that essential value of challenge, forcing continuous transparency and, yes, security updates, which maybe paradoxically ultimately stabilizes the system in the long run.
Cost of this necessary challenge, as you put it, is documented right there in the material as, well, unacceptable. When the world's most devastating cyber attacks, resulting in $50 billion of damage, are orchestrated by someone who perfectly embodies the fusion of deep government knowledge and unchecked hacker methods, Miles Foster, we really have to conclude that this movement represents a net drain on national security and stability. They are the static, the friction on the line that provides the perfect camouflage for true malicious intent.
So ultimately, whether you view the hacker community more as a kind of digital immune system, rapidly responding to systemic institutional failure, or whether you see them as the source of the infection itself, it seems to depend entirely on what you prioritize. Is it the maintenance of the existing, often flawed security status quo? Or is it the maybe disruptive imperative of continuous, transparent challenge and exposure?
And that inherent conflict, it definitely leaves us to wonder whether the chaos they inevitably induce will continue to serve as the perfect camouflage for those hostile forces, both inside and out, who are intent on bringing down our digital infrastructure long after the perhaps amateur idealists have moved on to their next challenge.